Now let's go over legal question number 657. Will robot return to origin? Now there is a robot starting at position 0, 0. So that's the origin. Origin is 0 and 0 on a 2D plane. So our 2D plane looks something like this, where x is the horizontal axis and y is the vertical axis. And if you remember from your math class, the first number is our x, next one is our y. A sequence of its moves. So we're going to be given a bunch of moves. Judge if this robot ends up at 0, 0, which again is our origin, after it completes its moves. So we're going to be given a bunch of moves, and we want to make sure that this robot ends up where it was before. So the starting position, which is our origin. The move sequence is represented by a string, and the character moves at index I represents its move. Valid moves are right, left, up, and down. If the robot returns to its origin after it finishes all its moves, return true, otherwise return false. Now we're going to be given a bunch of moves, and we want to make sure that our robot ends up where it was before, so the origin. Note that the way robot is facing is irrelevant. R will always make the robot move to the right ones, L will make it to the left, so on and so forth. Now let's look at our example. So for our example 1, we have our moves as U and D, and as you know, that's up and down. Now how we're going to do this is, let's first draw our x and y plane, and this is our x, this is our y, and for now it starts at 0. Well, we start at the origin, so 0, 0. We go up by 1 and then down by 1. Well, if we go up and down by 1, that's plus 1 and then minus 1, which is 0. So we do end up at 0, 0, so x or y, which is the origin. So we are going to be returned true. So remember that x is the horizontal move, that's right and left, and y is the vertical move, up and down. Since we had u and d up and down, we only added and subtracted on the y pointer only. Now let's look at our next one. So we have our x and y plane. Our moves are L and L. Now this is our origin. We have our x, y. It starts at the origin, so 0 and 0. And our moves are L, L. So that's left, left. Well, if you were to move left, it's towards this way, right? And that's a minus move. So that's 1 here. That's another 1 here. So that's minus 2. And how do we get minus 2? Well, left is minus 1, minus 1. So we end up with minus 2. And is minus 2, 0 the origin? No, it's not. So we're going to return false. And we do have more examples. The important part is that x is going to represent right and left movements, and y is going to represent up and down movements. If you have a down, subtract. If you have a left, subtract on the x-axis. If you have a right, you add 1. Up is you add 1 to y-axis. So do that mathematically and then try to get the point. And if it is the origin, you return true. If not, you return false. If you guys find this helpful, make sure you guys like and subscribe. Thanks. Now let's go over our first solution. Our first solution is going to have a time complexity of O of n and space of O of 1. So this problem is really simple compared to other ones because we just have to make two variables, x and y, and x is going to handle the horizontal moves and y is going to handle the vertical moves. And vertical moves are represented by up and down, and horizontal moves are represented by right and left. And what we can do is for up and right, we can add to our respective variables, and for down and left, subtract from our respective variables. So first, let's create our two variables. So that's going to be x and y, and that's going to be set to the origin. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use array destructuring, and I'll explain this later, x and y, to set this equal to an array which has two values, 0 and 0. Now what this does is it's just simply labeling this first value as x and this one as our y. That's it, nothing too special. So again, the first value is x, second value is our y. Or if you want, you can do x is equal to 0 and then y is equal to 0. That's totally up to you. Now we're going to use a for loop, make a for loop to iterate through each and individual character in our string. So let's make our for loop. Let I is equal to 0. We want to iterate through everything. So I is less than moves.length. and we increment by 1 each time. All right, that looks good. Now we need to check if our current character is UDL or right. So let's create some if statement. So if our current moves at index I, if this is equal to, let's say, R, so right, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to increment our x by 1, and we need to handle left, right, left, up, and down. So let's do that. So now it's going to be our left. If it's left, we want to subtract our x by 1, and let's now do our up. So if it's up, we want to add to our y variable, right? So y, and we add once, and then if it's down, so that's going to be d, we subtract our y by 1 each time. So that looks good. So if our current character is R, we're going to add, L, subtract, so on and so forth. Now we need to check if our x and y's end up at the origin. So we need a check. What we'll do is return. Let's use the logical not operator x and not operator and y. And as you can see, we have our results, true, false, false. And if you don't know how this works, well, if x evaluates to a falsy value, which is 0, we're going to use the not operator to get the opposite of that. So false, not operator, that means we want the opposite of false. So that's going to return true. And same thing for y. If y is a falsy value, so we mean 0. If y is 0, we use the not operator. And since 0 is a falsy value, this is going to return true. And if both of them return true, we are going to return true as our result. Now let's implement our second solution. And for our second solution, we are going to use a switch statement. And you don't get to really use a lot of switch statement because I don't like it, because you just have to type so many things. But let's just do it for fun, just to explore different solutions. Now, same as before, I'm going to destructure my array x and y and set this equal to my origin, so which is 0 and 0. All right, that looks good. And let's make our for loop to iterate through each character. Now we need our switch statement. So switch statement is going to have a switch, and we're going to have different cases. Well, here we're not going to have a default case, and our key is going to be moves at index I, right? So let's change that, moves at index I. And what are going to be our values? Well, our value is going to be our movement, so right, left, up, and down. So let's implement that. Let's start with right. If it's right, what do you want to do? We want to increment x by 1, and we stop. And we're going to need multiple cases. Second one is going to be our left. If it's left, we want to decrement our x by 1, and this should be a string, not a variable. Okay, that looks good. And now we need our vertical cases, so that's going to be up. And if it's up, we want to increment our y by 1, and then it's going to be our final one, which is going to be down. And if it's down, remember that we want to decrement our y by 1. Okay, given that, we're actually done with our switch statement. Now let's check if our robot ends up at the origin. For this one, let's just stick with a regular check. So if x is equal to 0 and y is equal to 0, and as you can see, we have our result. So the logic is pretty much all the same as our previous solution. It's just different code. We use a switch statement instead of if statements, and we check, well, do we end up at the origin? If we do, we return true. If not, we return false. If you guys find this helpful, make sure you guys like and subscribe. Thanks.